What's up, everyone? We are live again. I'm Kevin Boilard, and my guest today is the Director of Media at First Class Lacrosse and also the lead draft analyst for the Premier Lacrosse League, Adam Lamberti. Adam, the comments are already flowing. Chase is here. Miles is here. Nick, everyone is saying what's up. What's going on, Adam? How are you?
What's going on? Thanks for the intro. Glad that that's my unofficial title now, but yeah, super pumped to be on.
Yeah, so I see 𝐓𝐇𝐄 𝐋𝐀𝐂𝐑𝐿 as always in the comments section. We're going to be breaking down your big board. So first of all, give the fans out there a little bit of an understanding of the difference between a big board and a mock draft.
Yeah, good question. So I actually had a few people comment, like I have Aidan Maguire, short stick defensive midfielder at 1, but like some people are commenting like, is he going to go first overall? Like it just kind of depends. It's different in that big board. It's my players regardless of position, who I think is the best. I have 50 prospects on this list, and draft. I think is my mock drafts will probably look a little different from the big board, just looking at what teams need, in terms of positions and different fits and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely. So a little bit of a difference there. This is just pure ranking. So Adam, this list came out yesterday, correct? Or the day before?
Yep, yesterday.
So this is Adam's top 50 players in college lacrosse that are draft eligible for 2026. Now, with the season starting, the draft's going to be earlier in the year. Everything's a little condensed. Do you see that having an impact at all?
Yeah, definitely a little bit. I mean, with the overlap with the NCAA season, I know we saw even it with a little last year. Some guys like I think Pat Cavanaugh, you think 2 years ago, fresh off a national championship, and then he's going right into training camp, and obviously needs a few days to recover. So I definitely think that's going to be something for coaches and general managers to consider. Who's still playing in May for their respective colleges.
All right, so keep shouting out where you're watching from, who you're a fan of, and what players you want to see in Adam Lamberti's big board. We're going to break it down here. You already mentioned it. Your number one player in your big board is Aidan Maguire, short stick defensive midfielder from Duke. Give us a lowdown. Who is he?
Yeah, Aidan Maguire, if you don't know him, I mean, he stands out right away on the field, 6'3", north of 200 pounds. The biggest thing about him that's, why he's number one is his ability to impact a game offensively and defensively. I mean, Kevin, he was defensive player of the year or co-defensive player of the year in the ACC as a short stick, which I even did research going through the website since the ACC started, naming that award since 2012. I believe he's the first short stick to win that, short stick defensive midfielder to win that in the ACC. So it just speaks to, how good he is defensively. I mean, 26 calls turnovers as a short stick. Super impressive. But then, you look at the stats, 6 goals, 4 assists offensively in transition, with the fast pace of the PLL, he just projects as a really high prospect between the lines, impacting the game all over.
Aidan Maguire, number one overall. At number 2, we're sticking on the defensive side of the ball. It's your first long poll, Will Schaller out of Maryland. Tell us who he is.
Yeah, I don't know how Maryland does it. They just keep, producing first-team All-Americans at the defensive position, and Will Schaller's the latest. He was kind of a guy that grew under 𝐓𝐇𝐄 𝐋𝐀𝐂𝐑𝐿, and really emerged as the number one guy this past season. And he's just a lefty with sound footwork, really good on ball. But he played LSM early in his career at Maryland, so he's really versatile. Can play LSM in a pinch. Just really good in team defense. Something you're getting with those Maryland defenders.
And we're going to stay at Maryland for number 3 here, but we're switching to the offensive side of the ball. It's your first attackman, Eric Spanos.
Yeah, Eric Spanos, 6'4" attacker, really physical dodger. And what I really like about him is his versatility. He's played attack and midfield in his time at Maryland. Had a really strong Final Four this past year, and just can score goals in different ways. Is a really physical dodger, and just can kind of fit anywhere on an offense.
Coming in at number 4, this name's been around for forever, and he's finally draft eligible. Long stick midfielder, Will Donovan.
Yeah, it seems like Will Donovan's been playing, for years now, but that's because he's been a starter, at Notre Dame since day one. And in their title runs, he was, even as an underclassman, just as crucial as any player in that run, honestly, scooping up ground balls. He had a big one in overtime against Virginia, I want to say in 2023, in that Final Four. Just been making plays for the Fighting Irish for forever. Just super steady, really good off the ground, and just, won't leave offensive players alone. Just always looking to cause havoc in the middle of the field.
At number 5, let's kick it to one of the smaller schools, Towson attackman, Mikey Weishauer.
Yeah, Mikey Weishauer playing attack for Towson, but when you look at his athleticism, his speed, he kind of reminds me of a little bit of Andrew McAdory, as a field stretching midfielder, who's can get ahead of steam coming out of the box, really good at sweeping to a strong hand over the top. So like you said, a little bit undersized, but I kind of think of him as like an Andrew McAdory type where, he's kind of gets the offense going and will score his goals, but his speed is what makes him special.
I love that comparison. At number 6, I think everyone knows this name, Joey Spallina, attackman out of Syracuse.
Yeah, Spallina has had, such an amazing 3 years at Syracuse so far. And I believe he's only 61 points away from, breaking the Syracuse school record for points, which, I think we all assume he's going to do. Just super productive, super intelligent attacker, really good feeder from behind the net, really good handles, on the crease, really good finisher. When you have that many points in your career, obviously you're just going to be a very skilled attackman. And, anyone that's watched Joey Spallina knows that that's what he is.
Jacob, I see you in the comments section. Let me know what you think of this one. Number 7 was a little bit of a surprise to me. It's Alex Ross, defenseman out of Penn State.
Yeah, I had him and Bobby Van Buren, who'll be at number 9, kind of neck and neck. I'm honestly still kind of debating that, but it's early in the season, so a lot of stuff will change. But Alex Ross, another guy like Will Donovan for Notre Dame, he's been playing for Penn State, for what feels like years, and I'd have Ross slightly ahead of Van Buren, just his ability to fit, anywhere on a defense. We'll get to Van Buren a little later, but I just think he's more versatile and he can fit in any defensive scheme. Obviously great on ball, but like any defender, super intelligent off ball and just a really good player out of the Big Ten.
Before we get to Van Buren, at number 8, Matt Collison, midfielder out of Hopkins.
Yeah, another like big offensive dodger. I feel like we have a few of those in this draft, but Matt Collison in 2024 had a few overtime goals. Really just burst onto the scene. But you watch this guy, is a 6'4", 6'5" Canadian lefty midfielder. He dodges angrily is how I described him. He can get around you, but he's also very capable of just dodging right through defenders too, and getting a shot off whenever he wants. And that type of physicality, I think, bodes well at the next level.
I'm a big Matt Collison fan, and I'm counting on him to have a big senior year at Hopkins this spring. But back to Bobby Van Buren at number 9 out of Ohio State. Tell us the lowdown on him.
Yeah, Van Buren, another one of a great defender in what's shaping up to be a great defending class. He might actually be the best one-on-one cover defenseman, maybe. I've heard people say that, and I don't disagree necessarily, but just super good footwork out in space, super strong lower body, and is just really good at, he's taking the number 1 matchup on the opponent's team every single week. And, I think he's proven that he's more than capable of shutting down some of the top attackers in the nation.
Absolute beast. We're going to talk more about him and the other defenders on this list. But to round out your top 10, it's Chad Palumbo. Midfield. You see him as midfielder or attackman out of Princeton? Midfielder,
yeah. He could play a little bit of both, but he's been a midfielder at Princeton. And, I don't know if anyone remembers, the quarterfinal against Syracuse last year. 6-goal performance, I thought, was one of the most impressive of the year. Just super, super slick off that lefty wing. And just a guy that's, can get his own shot off that lefty wing, but is also a really capable feeder and just, could be really good in a 2-man game, from the lefty wing.
Awesome. So there is Adam Lamberti's top 10 college draft eligible players heading into the season. Now, things could change. This is just V1. I'm sure there will be another one before the draft where things are going to get shaken up. But
There's going to be a lot of
I've
change.
already got a lot of questions. Let me know in the comment section. James Hogan calling out his Josh Yago take. We'll see. But let's start at the top. Aidan McGuire. Really unusual to see a short stick defensive midfielder as the number one prospect. But this guy's legit. This guy won midfielder of the year last year as a short stick defensive midfielder. And he was the only college player on Team USA training camp roster last fall. So what makes Aidan McGuire different? I know you touched on it a little bit, but why is he the best overall player in this year's draft?
Yeah, I think you touched on it with the Team USA point. I mean, like if you look at him, he's got a pro-ready, build. He's 6'3", just built, like 200 pounds, like very, very strong. So he certainly looks the part. And, as a defensive midfielder, that's what you need to push out some of the stronger Dodgers, in the PLL. But, what makes him really exciting is the offense ability, like we talked about earlier. He had 2 goals against Syracuse last year, 10 points on the season. And when you think about a PLL, a faster paced PLL, with quicker shot clocks, he's just that much more exciting as a prospect with his ability to play on both sides of the field.
Yeah, I love him in transition. He also had the game-winning goal in double overtime against Richmond. We've mentioned a couple times on these lives, but he's an absolute stud. And as Adam mentioned, the PLL field, for those who don't mention, it's 10 yards shorter, and the 10 yards are out of the middle of the field. So Aidan McGuire, who's already a menace in transition, is going to get from point A to point B in a blink. So I'm big. Do you think they maybe let him run a little wilder on offense this year?
I mean, I don't see why not. We've seen teams do it, off a face-off win when you don't have a lot of time to make subs, they'll go right into the offense. So I think that's an area we could definitely see him right off a face-off win, and then they're just giving him the green light to attack, to the net.
Yeah, I likened it to a different Duke midfielder, Garrett Ledman, who started as a defensive midfielder and then kind of became an offensive midfielder in his last year. I don't think that Aidan will play that much offensive midfield, but it just shows Duke does have kind of a, hey, if you're a guy who can go get us a goal, we'll put you on offense. Kind of reminds me too of Richmond's Charlie Packard down the stretch last year. They were like, all right, leash is off, go run some offensive reps in the NCAA tournament against UNC, and he was awesome. So, but he had played defensive midfield the whole year leading up to that. So I'm super excited to see the evolution of Aidan McGuire as the season goes on. But let's keep it rolling. We got to talk about defensemen. Let's talk about them as a whole. So Will Schaller is your top-ranked defenseman. But first of all, tell us why you have Alex Ross ranked ahead of Bobby Van Buren. You touched on it briefly. Is it really just his scheme fit?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Van Buren, I think he's, like a number one guy, and he's kind of has to fit in a defensive system where, they're like, you go cover the ball. Like he wants the best attacker. And I think Alex Ross, the reason I have him higher is just he's, can fit in a little bit more defensive schemes. But like you mentioned, both obviously in the top 10, the defensive class as a whole, especially out of the Big Ten, Schaller at Maryland, Ross at Penn State, and Van Buren at Ohio State. Just a really good defensive class.
Yeah, I'm curious what about Schaller makes him a cut above the other two?
Yeah, I think he was just the most consistent throughout the year, to be honest with you. All of last year, he just made plays, would shut down, top attackmen consistently. And I just think, Maryland's had a really good track record of defensemen. And that's not to say, Penn State or Ohio State hasn't, but, you think about the Matt Dunns and Ajax Zapatellos of the world, Tim Muller, just you kind of know what you're getting with those Maryland defenders. And like I said, they're going to be strong in all facets of it, of the game. But, for my money, Schaller was just the most impressive and the most consistent throughout last year.
We'll talk about, and by the way, people want to say Bobby Van Buren, he shared the Schmeiser Award with Sean Light, and he did for best defenseman in the nation. But Schaller, who's in the same conference, won Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. So it's so interesting when you ask different people what they see. and different voters are going to give you a different answer. We're going to talk about Spanos in a minute, who's wearing number 1 for Maryland. But were you at all surprised they didn't go with Schaller for the number 1 jersey?
A little bit, but I kind of like that it goes to an offensive guy. I know it started with Joe Walters and Matt Rambo, obviously. So, and I know like Logan McNaney had it and Brett Makar, but I kind of like it on the offensive end. So.
I do too. As a former attackman, I feel like that's where it belonged. It was a little weird when it went from Makar to 𝐓𝐇𝐄 to McNaney. Obviously, I thought those Maryland teams had more of a defensive identity. I think with the number 1 jersey going back to Spanos might be a sign that, hey, Maryland's about to be maybe not 2022 Maryland again, but a more offensive identity team with Spanos wearing the number 1. So on the note of Spanos, last year you came out with a mock. When did you come out with that mock, by the way?
I want to say it was during the PLL season last year. So it may have been like August or September, but yeah, it was a way too early mock draft.
Yeah.
And,
it's never too early for me.
Yeah,
I know we have to put it in the title just to hedge it a little bit, but mock drafts never too. I'm the guy who after the draft, the day after the draft, I'm looking at, okay, what's next year's big board? Does anyone have a mock draft for next year yet? NFL, same way. But last year you had, in your most recent mock draft, the way too early one, you had Eric Spanos going number 1 overall to the Archers. Are you still leaning that way? And what do you think his ceiling is in the PLL?
Yeah, good question. If the Archers were to go an offensive player, I think it would be Spanos. And I mentioned it earlier, but kind of his versatility, he can play attack, he can play midfield, he can kind of dodge anywhere on the field. So, if the Archers are looking to go offense, I think he will be the pick. If I had to guess, I mean, obviously it's way out, but, you talked about his comparison. They're different styles, but he reminds me of a Jared Bernhardt light. Like obviously different Dodgers, and, Jared Bernhardt is very, very fast. Just can beat his guy with speed, and Spanos is more of a physical Dodger. But when you think about like where Bernhardt played for the Outlaws, he could play attack. He could play midfield. He could dodge from up top. He could dodge from X inverting. That's kind of how I see Spanos fitting in on a PLL offense.
Yeah, my man Shane from Stick Talk calls him Eric No Bag Spanos. To me, he seems like a guy like, yeah, maybe he doesn't have that like go-to move, but he could stick his shoulder into you and he can shoot. He's got a little bit of he's got a hitch move. He can take your ankles from X. So, maybe the type of guy who, when you picture him, you can't think of like, what's his go-to move? But I do think he's a better attackman than some let on. And I think down the stretch last year too, he kind of took that offense on his shoulders. For the longest time, we were talking about Maryland as, a team and an offense that was greater than the sum of its parts. And Spanos kind of stepped forward as the alpha Dodger scorer late down the stretch. And he ended up leading the team last year with 55 points. So Spanos, I think, is going to be a good pro. Again, a guy who committed in 8th grade. Like, this isn't a guy who came out of nowhere. We've been waiting for Spanos to have his coming of age. I think he started to last year, now wearing number 1 at Maryland. This is a big year for him, and I think it's going to really leverage his PLL draft stock. I think you're ahead of the curve on Spanos, to be honest. But I got to talk about these other next two offensive guys, and let's get into it a little bit, because you got Mikey Weishauer ranked above Joey Spallina. I know that's going to ruffle some feathers. Some people are going to hardcore agree with you. Some people are going to really be mad about that. Tell us, before we go any further, how did you come to that decision?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, they're just two different players. Like, I know that they're both labeled as attackmen, but like I said, like, I think Mikey Weishauer is going to be a midfielder at the next level. He's a lefty with speed. Is really good at shooting on the run with his left hand, which is why I think he projects well as a midfielder. Even though he is playing attack for Towson, you got to have your best players on the field at all times. I do think at the next level, he is a midfielder. And then Joey Spallina, everyone knows him. He's been super productive since day one at Syracuse. But he's a different attackman than Mikey Weishauer. He's more of a in-tight dodger, really good feeder from behind the cage in the righty wing, really good off ball, really good inside. So they're just different players, honestly. It's not like, it's kind of hard to compare them.
I guess that's true. Do you feel like it's a type of thing where maybe Weishauer fits into more spaces and Joey Spallina is very clearly an ex-attackman? So looking back a couple of years when the Cannons drafted Pat Cavanaugh and they were running him through the midfield and it wasn't working for the Cannons. Pat Cavanaugh wasn't happy. They ended up making the trade because there was no scenario where Pat Cavanaugh was going to leap Asher Nolting in the starting lineup and become the ex-attackman. However, when he goes to Denver, there it is, gift-wrapped ex-attack position for him, and he flourishes. So how many teams do you even see have, first of all, do you agree with my assessment there? And then how many teams even have like an opening at ex-attack that Joey Spallina could come in and take?
Yeah, totally. I definitely agree with you. I mean, for Joey Spallina to have the most impact on a PLL team, I think he needs to be starting at an attack position. That's just what his skill set is made for. And to your point, Kevin, I mean, how many spots are open? And, I think that's the fun in it right now. It's like there's going to be a lot of changing parts over the next few months, and there might be some trades and players moving, and then like there might become a good landing spot for Spallina that maybe isn't a good landing spot for Weishauer, and vice versa.
I don't know. I've been watching a lot of Eric Law highlights with his recent retirement, and I think Joey Spallina could be an Eric Law type player in the PLL. I think everyone criticizes him for not being as dominant a Dodger against true number one poles. That's not where most of his points come from. But Eric Law had an extreme IQ and knew where to be on the field at all times, knew where his teammates were at all times. That to me is Joey Spallina. Mikey Weishauer is going to have to make it work more so with his athleticism. Do you think that there's a factor of like Joey Spallina is playing at Syracuse, higher level competition and producing more? Mikey Weishauer is less productive against lesser competition. Is that factoring in at all? Or are you just looking at the pure player, like the measurables?
Yeah, good question. I mean, obviously production's important too, but when I think about doing a mock draft for the PLL or thinking about a big board, I'm kind of thinking more like the attributes, like you were saying, Kevin. So like, I'll give an example. Like last year, Andrew McAdory, like wasn't the highest scoring attackman or midfielder, but just his speed and what he created for the offense, is why a lot of people had him ranked so highly, like with how translatable that would be to the PLL. And so with Weishauer, I kind of see the same thing.
Yeah, with the comparison to Andrew McAdory, I will admit you're opening my eyes a little bit on Weishauer. Again, I'm not a hater on him. I'm definitely team Joey Spallina if we're going against these, if we're comparing these two. But Andrew McAdory definitely came in and made an instant impact with his athleticism without being the biggest midfielder. So, and he got a lot of hockey assists that he didn't get credit in the stat book for. So if that's the type of player Mikey Weishauer can be against PLL pros, I'll believe it when I see it, I guess. I'll take the more proven commodity in my mind in Joey Spallina. But let's move on and talk about some other. If you guys have more questions for Adam about Joey, or Mikey, or anybody else on this list, drop them in the comment section now, and I'll make sure I read them at the end. But let's move on because I want to talk about Matt Collison. As I said in the beginning, big fan of Matt Collison. He's the only Hopkins player on your big board. Hopkins had a down year last year. Matt Collison, some might define his year as a down year, but he had the exact same number of points. How do you feel about Matt Collison today compared to a year ago as a pro prospect? And do you see his trajectory as trending upward or downward right now?
Yeah, I kind of feel as strongly as I did, at this point last year, because like we were talking about, with this big board, you're kind of looking at the physical attributes and the skills that might translate to the PLL. And I know we talked about Collison, just super, super physical Dodger, 6'4", is really capable of getting off his own shot, which I think is a very valuable thing in the PLL. And like you said, Hopkins had a down year. And I think Collison, had his least amount of goals and not as good a shooting percentage, but I also attribute that to a down Johns Hopkins year offensively. So, I kind of just stick with what I'm seeing, as a Dodger from him. And, I still feel the same way as I did.
Yeah. And for me, I saw the player he was his sophomore year and how the ball was in his stick in every big game, late down the stretch, delivering big game-winning goals. I don't know how Hopkins got away from that last year, but they need to just put the ball in this guy's stick and tell everyone to get it out of the way, because I think he's that type of playmaker. And I also think he might be a better pro than he will be than a college player. I think he's got the body to be a pro, and I think he just understands lacrosse. And as you said, angry Dodger, he's going to bring that intensity with him to the pros. So Canadian dude, he knows how to compete, wants to play lacrosse.
Yeah, definitely. I feel the same way about him.
Cool. I just don't want to skip over Will Donovan. Let's talk about him real quickly. But to me, he feels like one of the safest bets in the draft. Just because we've seen so much of him, 2-time national champion. He's got a ton of caused turnovers. But I kind of want to talk about him in the prism of last year. I think you had Ben Ware ranked as high as number 2 on your big board, right? You were a big Ben Ware guy.
Yeah.
And then he ended up slipping all the way to round 3. Part of that's probably Virginia's struggles. I think there were some other analysts who, made their voices heard and maybe, made it a little murkier. But I'm curious if you see Will Donovan the same way you saw Ben Ware last year, both in your evaluation and where he could go in the draft, or do you think he's like a lock to go first round? There's no way he falls.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's a lock for the first round, but like you said, Kevin, he feels like one of the safer players just because what he's done, his 3-4 years at Notre Dame, has played in every game since his freshman year, and has just been super, super consistent. Now, I don't think he has the goal scoring upside, of a Ben Ware, like we talked about, or like a Jake Pacino for the Outlaws. But what you're getting is just a super consistent long pole that doesn't get beat that often. And whenever there's a ground ball, in the area, he's going to make a play on it. So just feels like a really safe guy. Like you just know that his game is going to translate to the next level really well.
Yeah, when I talk about short stick defensive midfielders and also long stick midfielders, I feel like they go into 2 buckets. There's, in the case of short sticks, there's the Danny Logan, who's the lockdown defender, who's probably not going to offer a ton on the offensive end. And then there's Ryan Terefenko, who's also a great defender, but his superpower is running down the field in transition and creating offense. Jake Pacino is that for a long pole, whereas maybe Colin Squires is more of a lockdown defender type LSM. I would say that Will Donovan falls into the latter category. By the way, you deserve to do more victory laps. You need to do a victory lap on Ben Ware. You were right, and he was awesome, right? Would you say his rookie year was more like what you projected it to be when you were saying he was number 2?
Yeah, I mean, if you just look at the offensive production he had at Virginia and his skill set, and then you saw that in the pros. I forget how many 2-pointers he had or how many goals, but he was on that Water Dogs team. He was lighting it up.
Yeah, I mean, him and Jimmy Freehill were keeping them alive in the semifinals from the 2 bombs. But then also you deserve a victory lap for predicting before the season Cornell was going to win the national championship.
Yeah.
And then I saw you're on Georgetown this year, right?
I'm on Georgetown. First of all, it's easy to bet on CJ Kirst with Cornell last year. But yeah, this year we're going with Georgetown. And, I wrote a preview on it on firstclasslacrosse.com. But my kind of argument is I just think they have the most complete team. Obviously Rory and Liam Connor coming in from Colgate, 2 big transfers to their attack unit. But, they have a really good goalie in Anderson Moore, really good faceoff guy in Ross Prince, 2 good midfield lines, 2 good defenders in Ty Banks and Robert Plath. So, when you think about complete teams, you know, they're seem like one of the best.
All right, well, let's check back in next year and see if you can do another victory lap then.
Yeah,
but
maybe, yeah.
yeah, back to the draft or draft eligible players in your big board. At number 10 is Chad Palumbo. We talked about what makes him great, but I'm curious, again, guys, this is just the top 10. Adam went through and ranked 50 players that are draft eligible. So he's got a lot, there's a lot more, and it's going to move. It's going to move between now and the draft. So who on your big board feels the most threatening to knock Chad Palumbo out of the top 10?
Yeah, good question. And I don't know if this is like cheating, but you know, some guys right below him I have are Silas Richmond of Albany and Michael Leo, a midfielder out of Syracuse. And you know, those guys are right there to be in the top 10. You know, I know if for my Syracuse fans, you know how good of a midfielder Michael Leo is. And then Kevin, I know Silas Richmond is your guy. Obviously, highlight reel goals. But you know, a player that the more I watched him, the more I came to this comparison. And I know he's not at this level yet, but it's Miles Thompson. You know, another Albany great. I don't think he's as dynamic a Dodger of Lyle, but when you look at the goal scoring ability and the creativeness around the net of Silas Richmond, you know, I definitely saw some shades of Miles Thompson. So those are two guys that could definitely get in the top 10.
Yeah, I've been in Adam's ear about Silas Richmond for about a year now, at least a year, saying you need to watch this guy. You need to watch this guy. I'm telling you, I really think he's gonna be in the mix for the top pick. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself there. Maybe I am. But if we're talking, if the Archers are looking at their options and they're looking at Joey Spallina and Eric Spanos and Silas Richmond, we'll see how the spring goes before I go any further. But fourth most points among returning players, 89 points last year for Albany. I think Albany's going to have a big year, and he's the biggest reason why. Just some other guys that aren't in your top 10, but I saw some on your big board. Do you think that a goalie will be drafted or a faceoff guy?
Yeah, good question. I don't think so for either position. You know, you had two goalies drafted last year in Logan McNaney and Emmett Carroll. So it kind of feels like, you know, all the goalie spots are kind of solidified, you know, maybe outside of California and Philadelphia. So, I mean, if that's the case, you know, I think in recent years we've seen teams knowing that other teams don't really need goalies or faceoff guys kind of wait, you know, till after the draft to scoop those guys up. So, you know, that's something I think might be a trend again this year. But, you know, I still think there's two great goalies in this draft. Well, more than two, but two on my big board and two face-off guys, you know, that are deserving of getting drafted. But, you know, Kevin, like you said, with the competing spots, you know, it might just not make a ton of sense to spend a draft pick on one.
Yeah, and I don't think there was a face-off guy selected last year, was there?
It wasn't.
No. So I would be surprised probably if a face-off guy goes this year. Goalie, maybe. But as you mentioned, if you don't have a pressing need for it, if you're just getting a backup, you might as well just pick them up in undrafted free agency. That's my opinion. But a couple of guys out there, and they're on your big board. Go check it out after this episode if you're interested. A couple other names I got to call out because these are ones when you're just scrolling through and you're just like, wait, what? You know, you maybe like make sure your glasses are clean. Am I reading this right? You got a D3 guy in Jack Rigneri out of Tufts at number 21, and Kyle Lewis, midfielder out of Delphi at number 48.
Yeah. So, you know, these are guys that I honestly had to watch more on, but, you know, the more you watch, the more impressed you are with them. You know, Jack Rigneri out of Tufts has just put up 78 goals last year. And a lot of that is because Tufts plays like really fast. You know, for any D3 lacrosse watchers out there, the NESCAC, the league as a whole, they just go in transition and it's fun to watch. But you look at his offensive skill set and, you know, it's more of an upside thing too. Like, yeah, maybe he hasn't played, you know, the D1 teams that some of these other prospects have played or some of these other prospects are playing against. But, you know, you just look at his athleticism and all the praise that, you know, you've seen from the Tufts coach and, you know, just watching the film. So he's just really, really interesting. Excited to watch him. And then Kyle Lewis of Adelphi, like you said, had the game-winning overtime goal in the D2 National Championship. And Inside Lacrosse actually just published a great article about his journey. And I know he had a ton of Division I offers in the offseason, when he was in the transfer portal, but chose to stay at Adelphi. So, he's certainly capable of playing at that level, but just a super, super strong dodger, really good split dodge out in space, and just a really good right-handed shooter. So those are two guys that, not playing the D1 talent that the other guys are, but you're just looking at their upside. And I think it's going to have a lot of PLL coaches and general managers excited.
Yeah, Kyle Lewis, who you see on your screen right now. I saw that article, and I also watched the podcast when they were ranking the top 50 players. And Matt Kinnear of Inside Lacrosse said in that podcast that he was actually committed in the transfer portal to Penn State for a short period of time and then decided to go back to Adelphi. I mean, how couldn't you? They've won back-to-back championships on the D2 level. He's going for the three-peat. And so is Rigneri, by the way, at the D3 level. So before you say like, oh, they don't play anybody, well, whoever they play, they trounce. Tufts runs through the competition. Adelphi is the best D2 team there is right now. So, yeah, I think Lewis is legit. I think he could definitely find his way into the PLL. The only thing that scares me about Rigneri is there's just so many attackmen. There's so many great D1 attackmen. He would have to do something really, really outstanding this year, I think, to get that look. But hey, a couple of years ago, we saw Cross Ferrara drafted out of Salisbury. So it can and has happened. So we'll see. I'm rooting for both of those guys. They would be immediate, automatic fan favorites if they make it to the league. So cool. Thank you, everyone, in the comments section. If you have any last questions for Adam, drop them in right now because we're about to wrap up the show. But I've got on the screen his top 10. Again, go to the PremierLacrosseLeague.com and find his top 50, the entire list. It's awesome. And about when do you think you're going to do an update?
Yeah, honestly, probably I'm thinking like once a month. Kind of as the games start to roll on, the college games, probably once a month, and there will be an article, as I make changes, and on the big board, actually, you'll get to see there'll be a green and red arrow to see who's moving up and who's moving down, and even some new additions. So be sure to be on the lookout for that and an article to go with it.
Speaking of new additions, Hogan wants you to comment on Josh Yago, the Notre Dame attackman.
Yeah. Well, I mean, honestly, haven't watched a ton of him, and kind of like my fear, and I've kind of knocked a few guys that have transferred over. I just need to see the fit in the offense. Obviously wildly productive at Air Force, really good attackman. And I've heard from, honestly, probably Hoagie. I've heard that he's doing well at Notre Dame so far. But for me, I just need to see it. Playing against those ACC opponents, and he's certainly one that will, honestly, if he plays well and plays like everyone expects, will probably leap onto the top 50.
I had one more question for you here. I forgot to ask you. One name on your big board that hasn't come up yet that you think is worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think Josh Yago is definitely one of them.
No, someone who's on your big board that we didn't mention yet.
Oh, someone on the big board that we haven't mentioned.
Could be anybody.
Could be anybody.
Someone that's worth a little spotlight.
There's a lot of them. Let's think. Let's go. Here's one, and it's kind of he's from the Patriot League. His name's Hunter Druin, midfielder out of Colgate. And Kevin, honestly, anyone following me, if I've been on Hunter Druin for a while. Just a super, super speedy lefty midfielder. Has put up really big numbers at Colgate. He had 6 goals against Harvard early in the season in 2025. So he's kind of a guy I'm keeping my eye out on. I think that he's just has all the dodging, attributes that you want at the next level, just super, super fearless around the net and fast. So anyone watching Patriot League this year, be on the lookout for this guy.
Yeah, he caught my eye in that Harvard game as well. I remember, and I'll throw in another Patriot League guy. How about Richard Checo from
Yeah,
Lehigh?
he's been. I mean, he has so many calls turnovers since his freshman year.
He's going to break the record.
He's going to break the record. He is just. I mean, this guy's all over the field. He especially like it's almost unfair. Sometimes Lehigh likes to do like a pressure ride where they just let Richard Checo, the LSM, just kind of roam the middle of the field, and he just racks up so many calls turnovers. He's just so good at it. Like I don't even know how he does it, but because he's kind of an undersized guy, he's not the biggest or fastest or strongest, but he just knows how to. He just knows how to play defense.
He knows how to get the ball out of the other guy's stick. I'm super curious to see how he does this year. I mean, I'm sure he's going to have a ton of calls turnovers, but it feels like there's just like this barrier that is stopping him from reaching like superstar level for some reason. I guess it's probably just playing for Lehigh and being out of sight, out of mind for a lot of fans. But if he makes it to the PLL and he's doing that at the pro level, he's going to be a super exciting player and very quickly become a fan favorite. So I'm a big fan of him, have been since his freshman year. But I think we talked about more than enough guys on this show. Again, head over to the PremierLacrosseLeague.com and check out Adam Lamberti's full top 50 big board V1 and stay tuned for V2. Adam, thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and thanks for everyone tuning in.
Yep, and college lacrosse is back this weekend, so we'll see you all this weekend. Peace out, everyone.